This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstag, Becky Thomas, and Jessica Black from the Mac's List team. This week, we're talking about why your first gig shouldn't be a dream job. Many college students have high hopes for a dream job right after graduation. That's the wrong approach, according to this week's guest expert, Mitch Matthews. The better way is to experiment with what he calls bridge jobs. Mitch and I talk later in the show. Sometimes we may know a job will be a hard one when we accept it. Other times we're surprised. To help you avoid the unexpected, Ben has found a list of the best and worst jobs of 2017. In a moment, he'll tell us which occupations made this year's chart. Why do employers ask workers to take on different unrelated jobs instead of hiring specialists to do each position? That's our question of the week. It comes from listener Shabina Hussein of Orlando, Florida. Becky shares her advice shortly. First, as always, let's check in with the Mac's List team, and we'll start with Ben, who every week is out there searching the nooks and crannies of the internet, and Ben's looking for those websites, books, and tools you can use in your job search and in your career. So, Ben, what have you uncovered for our listeners this week?
So it's December 27th. It's the end of the year, which means that it's time to review all of those like year-end lists, best of, worst of.
Okay, and while this will be broadcast during the holidays, this is a list that has legs. People will want to pay attention to it no matter what the month.
That's true. And the best and worst of list I'm going to share with you this week is the best and worst jobs of 2017, and this comes from CareerCast. So longtime listeners may remember that I shared this list of 2016 best and worst jobs way back in episode 58, and that originally aired in October 2016. So I'll tell you usually need to take these kind of things with a grain of salt, and that's because generally they're just opinion pieces. It's like one guy's idea of what the best and worst movie, job, quesadilla, salmon fillet is, right?
That bad burrito, if you're talking about
that's
lunches,
right?
Okay.
But the reason I keep going back to CareerCast list year after year after year is they have some really specific methodology that they use to compile both the best of and worst of lists. They look at things like environmental factors, stress levels, physical demands. They examine, the average salaries and prospects for career growth. A lot of different variables get thrown into the algorithm to figure out what the best and worst jobs are. So I think this is a lot more scientific than those best Disney princess lists that you might see on BuzzFeed, for example. Spoiler alert, it's totally Moana.
I think so.
According to my 3-year-old son, it's Moana.
You've got more intelligence, opportunities to get data here than I do.
That's true.
Yeah. She's the most modern and feminist. I like it.
All right. I like the sound of that.
So transitioning to less important topics of career and work, are you guys ready to hear what all this methodology came up with?
Ready?
Yeah.
Yes, let's go.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the good stuff. These are the best jobs of 2017. Number 1, statistician. Number 2, medical services manager. And number 3, operations research analyst.
Are these based on, I'm just clarifying, are these best for salary, long-term longevity?
Everything kind of gets mushed up into an algorithm.
Okay.
So it's like best career prospects, most opportunity, best salary.
Best maybe not most exciting.
Probably not, right? A lot of data here. And I think this was one of the themes from last year too. Like people who are really good at understanding and organizing and finding meaning in data, they can find work just about anywhere because data is the name of the game these days. So should we go to the dark side and talk about the worst jobs?
Yeah, this is your bottom 3 or top 3?
This is the bottom 3, the worst jobs. And I think mostly here they're talking about future growth prospects and salary. So the third worst job in 2017, according to CareerCast, not to me, according to CareerCast, was broadcaster. So like your local news reader.
Yeah, news anchors.
Number 2, logger. This is certainly an industry that we know a little bit about here in Oregon, and it's slowly getting phased out, I think. And
do you think it's getting automated?
Automated and outsourced to other countries, I think. And then, Mac, do you happen to remember what the number 1 worst job last year was?
I think it was newspaper reporter, wasn't it?
It was newspaper reporter. And for the second year in a row, newspaper reporter is the worst job in America.
Yeah.
Well, they've been getting a beating this year for sure.
Yeah. Becky, not to put you on the spot, do you want to lean in and tell us?
I'm the only one with that on my resume. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough gig, like, in a lot of ways, especially if they're, like, the methodology includes, like, salary, environmental issues.
Work-life
like,
balance.
Stress levels.
Yeah.
Those are all, like, a little bit tough for those professional journalists, but I feel for them, and it's, like, such an important job, too. Like, I don't want to lose it, but, like, it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is a journalist for a local paper in Oregon, and he gave me a hard time last year when he heard this podcast.
Yeah, and he's like, again, come on.
Scott, I'm sorry if you're listening. I'm sorry, man. But yeah, and again, this is not like a moral judgment on these jobs. It's like just talking about what the economics are. And I think the economics on something like a newspaper reporter is like you have to go to school for it, generally. And it's hard to get into it. And if you do get into it, there's not a whole lot of career prospects for you long term. And the salary, unless you're at the very top of the hierarchy, is pretty low. So they actually categorized 200 jobs on both positive and negative, good and bad, on this list. So I encourage you to check it out and see where your own career of choice lands you. I did not look for career podcaster on the list. Maybe
I think
that's growing.
Near the top.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a fun gig, but it's definitely a side project for us here.
It doesn't pay great, I'll tell you that.
You got to get in the ad game.
That's right.
If you want to get paid.
Yeah.
So if you want to check out the full list, it's at careercast.com, and we will have the direct URL to the full list in the show notes.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. And if you've got a suggestion for Ben, we'd love to hear from you. Write Ben directly. His address is ben@maxlist.org, and we may share your idea on the show. Now let's turn to you, our listeners, and Becky is here to answer one of your questions. Becky, what's in the Max List mailbag this week?
So this question came in via email from Shabina Hussein of Orlando, Florida, and she's asking, so she says, I have observed managers and executives say that they are wearing more than one hat instead of hiring new folks. Why is that practice so widely accepted? So I think that there's a couple things at play here. There's definitely a lot of reasons why a company leader would be wearing many hats, and whether it's a good reason or a bad one. But a lot of times, especially like with managers and executives, they either have some specialty or area of interest that makes sense for them to do more than one thing, whether it's based on their training or their specialties or whatever it might be. A lot of times, managers and executives are wearing more than one hat because they have to, whether it's a small company with limited resources or the organization, isn't scaling fast enough for leaders to get out of the day-to-day operations. A lot of times that's one of the key reasons why a leader would be wearing many hats. That person also might be a work martyr. They also might be like, I must do these 3 jobs, and it's like I'm staying late every night, and that's like part of my persona. Like I will always suffer for my job, and if everyone else should be.
Freak.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. Like a lot of times, those folks just can't delegate. They can't let go of the things that they should be able to let go of, which is like something that I understand.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of times what it is, and I think that whatever the reason, the fact that leaders in the organization that you're looking at, if you're a job seeker looking at that organization and they're talking about how many hats they're wearing, and if it's like a badge of sort of honor for them, that's a sign for you as a job seeker to sort of understand what the culture is. So if the leaders are all frantic and they're like, I'm wearing a lot of hats just because I have to. Like, that's sort of a red flag if you're looking for something more stable. But at the same time, it could be a sign of just sort of like the business is agile. They're all getting in there and chipping in, sort of a startup sort of situation, and maybe that's something that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So it really just depends on where you're at in your career. And I don't know. I mean, there's lots of sort of mixed opinions about whether it's better to be a generalist or a specialist. And a lot of times those generalists are able to sort of like have more of a leadership skill that they can apply to more than one area. And so it's okay to be wearing many hats if you're sort of managing those areas. So that's sort of some insight from my perspective. Do you guys have any other thoughts on that sort of wearing many hats and if it's good or bad?
Well, I think you are right about the causes of this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's money and management issues, people feeling that they either can't or don't want to delegate power out to other folks.
Right.
In terms of like whether it's good to wear many hats or not, Personally, I like organizations where there's some promise that I'm not going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Agreed.
Or where I
Yeah.
don't feel like a cog doing one very narrow job, and then it gets passed on to someone else. And so I think part of that is my background in the nonprofit space, where like everyone does everything, and that's
I
just
was-
kind of the way of the
I was going to talk about that too, of like the very traditional nonprofit world where that's just the case, where everybody does everything. I mean, it's like startups too, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think as a hiring manager too, when I think about the people I've hired, there's certainly like a job in my mind and on paper that person's going to focus on, but I think there's a lot of value in people who have the interest and the passion and the willingness to kind of go outside of that a little bit, and have ability to help out in other ways. It kind of reminds me of that debate about single-use kitchen utensils. Like you can go out to Bed Bath & Beyond and buy like a tool that like just cuts up avocados. That's all it does, and it's
Yeah.
not designed for anything else. And it's the best avocado cutter you could ever find. The question is, do you need a single tool that only cuts avocados when you have a knife in your drawer, right?
Right.
And so that's just my take. I mean, obviously, you need to specialize in certain things, and the more niche your industry or your profession, the more you
Right.
probably have to specialize.
Yeah.
But I think there's a big value in also being willing to, and sometimes marketing yourself as someone who can do other things as well.
I agree with all of that. And I think going back to sort of the managerial and executive side of things, I read an article recently that was talking about people who are really good at doing and implementing,
Executing, yeah.
executing are not always great at managing. And so oftentimes people move up the ladder into a managerial role, whether that's by choice or by sort of the organization kind of calls for it and they sort of get pushed into it. But maybe they just are executors at heart, and it's not necessarily that they're control freaks, but they just haven't developed that skill of being able to delegate because their natural tendency is to just do it themselves, which again doesn't make it a good thing. I think it's hard to compare if it's good or bad, but it's just a thing.
But yeah, because management is a skill in and of itself.
Absolutely, and it takes a lot of practice and development on your own as well. And it is, as someone who is more of an executor, but has worked in leadership roles, it does take that conscious effort and dedication to making sure that you are taking that step back and you're not just going in and doing it because you can, but learning how to delegate and to teach other people how, and to allow other people to grow underneath you.
And I think there's a question too here. I'm reminded of an essay we got at a class I took in graduate school, and it was the last week, and it was a course on public management. And to your point about management, Jessica, the instructors, it was an essay by Isaiah Berlin, and the question was, are you a hedgehog or a fox? And a hedgehog does one thing really well, a fox does a lot of different things. And the question the instructor wanted us to think about is, as we thought about our own careers, it's okay to go deep on a subject or be a consultant or a specialist or Recognize where your strengths are and your interests, but your strengths may lie in strategy and management and juggling a lot of different balls.
Right.
People have different passions.
Absolutely.
And the key is to figure out which way you lie.
Absolutely.
Are you a hedgehog or a fox?
Mm-hmm. And I think going back to this specific question really quickly is going back to what you said, Becky, about the culture fit of like, is this a place that you, like when you are assessing if this is the right fit for you? I think that's a really important question because some people, they may thrive under that type of management and other people wouldn't. And I think that that's a really key component to bring it back to how you operate and are you going to be able to, thrive in that environment. So
yeah, I think that's the bottom line in so many of these questions that we get from job seekers is like you have to know yourself first and you have to know what your needs are and what you bring to the table. So yeah.
All right, great discussion. Well, thank you for that advice, Becky, and thank you, Shabina, for that question. If you've got a question of your own, please write Becky. Her address is becky@maxlist.org or call the listener line. That number is area code 716-JOB-TALK. Or post your question on Facebook. And if we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere, our new book this year. And we'll be back in just a moment. When we return, I'll talk with this week's guest expert, Mitch Matthews, about why your first gig shouldn't be a dream job. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Mitch Matthews. Mitch Matthews is co-founder of the Big Dream Gathering, a serial entrepreneur, and a best-selling author. His Dream, Think, Do podcast helps people to dream bigger, think better, and do more. And this January, Mitch publishes a new book, Dream Job Redefined, the new rules for creating a career that matters and doing work you love. He joins us today from West Des Moines, Iowa. Mitch, thanks for coming on the show.
Mac, thanks for having me. Thanks for the great work that you're doing, too.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about your work later in the show, but I had a chance to listen to your podcast, and it's terrific.
Well, thank you very much. That's a true compliment from somebody who's got the history and the success in this realm. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and we do have to move on, but I do want to acknowledge we both share Iowa roots. So it's just
that's exactly. We could go for an hour just on that. So yeah, you better move on.
Midwestern Love Fest here. But our topic today, in fact, Mitch, is not Iowa. It's why your first gig after college shouldn't be your dream job.
Now
let's talk about that because I think when I talk to undergraduates or people who are making mid-career changes, they want to find that right job, and especially if they're coming out of college right out of the gate, don't they, Mitch?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's exactly what I found too. And as a part of the research for my book, I did about 200 interviews with people who would describe themselves as having dream jobs. And one of the things that I found was that although they didn't necessarily intend for this to be the case, none of them, and I mean none of them, found their dream job right out of the gate. They time and time again, they told me they had to go out and try stuff. They had to experiment. They, had to take those jobs, and we'll talk a little strategy there too, but had to take those jobs where they could really learn more about themselves, learn more about their craft, learn what they were passionate about. And it really took that first 1, 2, sometimes 3 jobs to really help them to hone in on what the dream job was and how to go out and achieve it or create it.
And was that a deliberate strategy on their part, Mitch, or did they learn that by happenstance? Because I asked because so many people I meet right after college, if they don't get that perfect job, they think, oh gosh, I screwed up. I'm doing something wrong.
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the reasons why we throw this out, and to say, hey, don't go after a dream job. That could be it can sound a little discouraging, but it's absolutely based on this research, these experiences. But to your point, most of these folks, because they didn't have, people out there doing like what you're doing, for most of them, they just had to kind of bumble along and find this out for themselves. But that's what they found was that, a lot of them, if they waited to find that perfect job, and that's that wrestling match. Like, well, what is my dream job? And I'll go out and find it once I know what it is. But until then, I'll just not do anything, right? It's easy to get stuck. It's easy to try to wait for the perfect thing. But what we've found is that purpose, that kind of clarity on what the dream is, that only comes from process. That doesn't come in a vacuum. That doesn't come before you get started. That only tends to come as a result of going out and trying things and experimenting with things. So we're a big advocate of what we call a bridge job. And that's one of the things that we saw in so many of these people's stories was they didn't necessarily find the dream job at first. They found what we call a bridge job. And that's a job that gets you to a dream job. And the bridge job is different than a dream job in that it's a little bit like when you think about, basic construction, right? A bridge is very important. It's designed to get you somewhere, but it's not necessarily something that's very comfortable. It's not necessarily something that you want to stay on for a long period of time versus a dream job. That you're more in a dream job when it feels like home, when it feels like a place you want to stay for a long time. So to be able to say, all right, I'm going to look for a dream job, or excuse me, I'm going to set my sights. I'm going to decide that someday, in fact, I'm going to have a dream job. But for right now, I'm going to go after a bridge job. And as I do that, I'm going to focus on what we call the meal plan.
So let's talk about those bridge jobs, how you find them, and how it's going to get you to where you want to be, that dream job. How does that work, Mitch?
Absolutely. So some of the things that we saw, the commonalities with effective bridge jobs was to identify what we call a meal plan and to be aware of the meal plan. Now, I say that, and the meal plan is an acronym for meal, but I always say, especially for recent graduates, if you tell your parents you got a job with a meal plan, it will allow them to sigh, a sigh of relief, like, oh, they're doing it right. So right. The meal plan in this case, though, is a little bit different. What we're talking about is bridge jobs allow you the meal plan in that it's all about who that job will allow you to meet, what it will allow you to earn, what it will make you available for, and what it might allow you to learn. So it's meet, earn, be available for, and learn. Those kinds of things, if you're focused on those types of things, you can maximize those bridge job opportunities. And sometimes it's about going out and getting a bridge job. But sometimes, and I know, some of your folks that are listening are in a job now and are thinking about a career transition, and you can actually retrofit a current job to make it an effective bridge job as well by keeping the meal plan in mind.
So 2 questions I'm sure our listeners will have is, first, how do I figure out what my dream job is? Because I'm guessing you need to know that to pick the bridge jobs that get you there. And second, how long does this process typically take? You talked about perhaps 2-3 jobs. Is it a 3, 5, 7, even 7-year journey, Mitch?
It really depends on the person. I would love to be able to say, well, this is a 1-year plan, right? And for some, it is a shorter process. But for others, it's a longer process because a part of, answering your first question, what is the dream job and how do you figure that out, comes as a part of this process as well. What's interesting about so many of the folks that I interviewed was they started with an essence of what it was they thought they wanted to do. Maybe they were passionate about leadership, or maybe they were passionate about crunching numbers. They just loved that. Or maybe they were passionate about or really good at organizing people or organizing process. They had an essence of it. But what I found was most people were more aware of the roles that they were interested in as opposed to the titles. And, titles can kind of get you wrapped around the axle a little bit. There's certain jobs, certain industries that are a little bit more clear cut, kind of butcher, baker, candlestick maker type titles that exist, an accountant, a sales executive, those kinds of things. Those titles are a little bit more clear. But what I found with most of the people that I interviewed was they actually were in roles now they didn't even know existed when they started the process. They only became aware of them as they pursued more of what, kind of that essence of what they were shooting for. So they knew what they were passionate about. And, they were starting to get more and more clarity on that as they continue to work towards it. But a part of the process is kind of figuring it out as you go, which I know it's so hard. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and perfectionists, we love to have the whole thing figured out before we can get started. So if you're a perfectionist and you're listening to this, man, that can be tough to hear. But giving yourself a little permission to say, I'm going to commit to experimenting. I'm going to commit to learning as I go. That's what's going to allow you to continue to go after this and find that dream job. I'll give you an example, if it's okay, of one of the people that I interviewed. He's an executive vice president for College Humor. His name's Spencer Griffin. Now, he was committed to finding something that he loved. He came out of college with a degree in business and a minor in theater. He was not necessarily the best business person that he knew, and he definitely wasn't the most creative theater person that he knew, but he was definitely the best business person he knew of in the theater department. And he was definitely the most creative person that he knew in the business department. So he said, I kind of felt like I had this hodgepodge of skills compared to everybody else, but he said, I just had this essence of what I wanted to do. And so he started to pursue bridge jobs that allowed him to try different things. They allowed him to work on his creativity, but they also allowed him to work on his organizational skills and his business skills and those types of things. And so he took an executive assistant role for a while. He took a PA role where he came alongside a producer and helped them produce. He also took a role for a while that allowed him to travel and organize events. And as he was doing these various bridge jobs, he was learning that, again, he wasn't necessarily the best business person he knew, and he wasn't necessarily the best theater person that he knew, but he was especially good at organizing creatives. And he was especially good at being able to translate business concepts to creatives, to people in the entertainment industry, to the theater department, to those folks that maybe didn't have a business background. And he said, I actually got really good at organizing creative people. And he didn't know that when he started the process, but because he gave himself that permission to experiment and grow, it allowed him to then get into College Humor, which was growing at the time, but work his way into an executive vice president role with College Humor, and he's just been killing it ever since. But he said, if I'd waited to say, all right, I don't know, if he waited to know what the dream job was to then pursue the dream job, he said, I would have never gotten to what I'm doing now. He said, I only clarified that by going out and trying some things. And that's what I always want to encourage people to do is get out there and experiment, commit to starting the process, and that clarity will come as you stay committed to digging in.
What's striking about that story, and it's a terrific one, is he didn't sit down 5-7 years ago and write, okay, I want to be the executive vice president at collegehumor.com, and these are the steps that are going to get me there over the next 3-5 years. He had to take a leap of faith, didn't he?
Absolutely. And actually a dose of humility as well. Because when he came out of college, he did real well in college, but it's one of those things where he said, I'm going to take a couple of roles. Some of his bridge jobs did not have real flashy titles. And he even in our interview said that he had to kind of swallow his pride a little bit because of a couple of his friends went out and got really good paying jobs they were not passionate about. And he said, I watched some of my friends buy really nice cars and start renting really nice apartments and, start to buy nice houses. And I was still kind of in these roles where I knew I was learning, I knew I was growing, but I certainly, my bank account wasn't growing as fast as some of my friends were. Now, he said, I look back now and see they were dying on the vine, and they started that process right after school. They just kind of said, all right, I'll just take whatever somebody's willing to pay me. And they kind of committed more to the monetary side of it, as opposed to where Spencer dug in and said, I really want to grow. I want to pursue, I want to clarify. And as he did that, he got more and more clear on his passions. And that actually worked out real well for him. And I can tell you story after story where, it was that type of approach where they decided, they committed to say, all right, what kind of positions can I take where I can meet the right types of people, where I can earn enough money to be able to, still grow, still, pay my bills, all of those things. But what kind of position could I be available then to learn some things on the side, take some classes, find a mentor, those kinds of things, or those positions that will allow you to learn the things that will help you to keep growing as well.
Now, Mitch, I want you to take us through quickly the MEAL acronym, meet, earning, availability, and learning. But before we do that, what would you say to listeners who, having heard that story about the gentleman at collegehumor.com, who might be uncomfortable with the uncertainty and the risk that's involved in this approach?
Absolutely. Well, here's the beautiful part of this is that, I am actually a recovering perfectionist, and I'm also a recovering worrier. So worry comes very easy to me. So I always, I love the scientific method because it stresses, the power of experimenting. It stresses the power of going out and trying things and learning from them. But I also love, there's something called the 2 L's of science, and that is learning fast and limiting risk. And taking the bridge job approach, I think, actually limits your risk much more so than kind of waiting until you have your dream job figured out. We're not talking about, just haphazardly going out and just taking any job. What we're talking about is being able to say, let's be strategic. What are those positions that might allow you to, again, meet the right people or earn what you need? And it's not just kind of throwing caution to the wind. I can certainly give you another example of this. We had someone I interviewed was named Diego Corza, and he graduated from school. He wasn't quite sure what his dream job was. He had gotten his degree in IT and coding, and he was very good at it, but he just had a sense that wasn't quite the dream. He went and got a nice job with GM. They moved him to Texas, and he just committed to learning as he went. And that meant for him continuing to develop his skills, continuing to bring excellence in the coding world for GM. But he also tried different things. He took classes at night, sometimes completely unrelated to his current career. He also started to look around and say, who's doing things that interest me? And he found out someone in the real estate world. He met with them a couple of times, really kind of fell in love with that industry, and actually said, hey, what would you say to me just driving you around? It was a real estate agent. And he said, what would you say is I'll just drive you around on the evenings and on the weekends, just so that I can learn what it is you do. I'll even help you with a website if you need it. But he basically just offered his services just so that he could be in proxemics to this person who was doing something that was interesting to him. Now, his job allowed him to do that. He worked a full schedule, an 8 to 5 schedule, but at nights and on weekends, he did this extra, kind of curricular type activity. And that interest started to grow. It turned into his passion. He actually started to build a real estate business on the side, and just a few years ago actually was able to leave the GM position as now a record-breaking real estate agent in Texas. But for him, that bridge job was something that paid him very well, allowed him to actually buy a home and even do some real estate investing. All of those things. He wasn't throwing caution to the wind, but he was committed to learning and growing and trying some new things. And that's what allowed him to uncover that passion that he's walking out today.
Well, let's quickly go through the 4 parts of the MEAL approach. Now, the first one is meeting. Give our listeners some just quick tactical tips here of how they can apply these ideas. So meet. What do you have in mind
So
there?
meeting, sometimes it's a matter of when you're in an organization, if you're retrofitting a current job or you're looking at other opportunities, for a new job or whatnot, to be able to say, all right, what kind of people would be working within this organization? What types of people could I meet? And if you're already in the position, being able to say, all right, who could I be meeting? And reaching out. It's so easy to silo. You know how this is within any organization, but to be able to say, all right, who could I meet? Who's doing interesting things within this organization? And reach out to do a coffee, to reach out to do a lunch, and just get to know people in your organization. So many of the people that I interviewed had done that within organizations, and that allowed them to grow their network in a short period of time and really be exposed to a lot of different areas within a lot of different industries, even working within this, the same organization. So meeting, who can you meet within that can be a real eye-opener.
Great. So let's talk about earning. What are some practical tips there, Mitch?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So with earning, a part of it is to be able to say, all right, what are your financial needs? For some, the financial needs aren't great. So the earning, I always think of these things as quadrants. The earning might be smaller. I know for me, as an example, when I was looking at making a career transition, I wanted to launch my own business. At that season in my career, earning was very important. We were living the sitcom life, single income, two children, oppressive mortgage. So I couldn't just throw out, the earning. The earning was very important. So I had to find something that allowed, us to cover our expenses and pay for our mortgage and all of those things. That was important for me. So that was important. But also I looked for that position that would allow me some flexibility, which helps us to move into that availability component. So for me, I went from a corporate training position where I was in a home office scenario, situation, to moving back out to a sales position. So all of a sudden, the availability aspect, the earning aspect was taken care of. But for me, what made it more enticing was the availability. It allowed me to actually be in my car. It allowed me to be more flexible. I could listen, to books on CD and those kinds of things, and really learn and grow and have a more flexible schedule than I'd had before. So that position allowed me to, again, check off the earning box, but also allowed me the availability that I needed to start doing some of those things that I wanted to do on the side.
Great. Well, and let's talk about the final letter in the MEO acronym, learning. What are some tips for listeners there?
Absolutely. So oftentimes it's being able to look for opportunities where you could really learn either something that you're wanting to pursue professionally. I know I was actually able to interview Sarah Haynes, who was on Good Morning America. She's now a regular on The View. For her, she came out of college and she knew she wanted to be in the entertainment business, but she wasn't quite sure what it was. Kind of like Spencer, she was wrestling with kind of knowing a kind of a general area, but wasn't sure entirely what it was that she wanted to do. So she actually found a position with the NBC Page program. It was not glamorous. It was not easy. She was sitting people in the studio. She was ordering sandwiches, doing the basics of scheduling and those kinds of things. But it got her access to so many different things where she was in the room as some of those things she dreamed of doing were happening. Now, she wasn't, a notable person in the room, but she had access. She could also be learning from people that were doing what it is that she wanted to do. So she took that job, although it was, low pay and not a lot of glamour, but it was one of those that paid off for her in spades as she started to learn what she needed to learn to move from, sitting people in the audience to being in front of the camera. She earned herself a position on the Today Show, which then got her to the Good Morning America and then on to The View as well. So it's that whole thing of being able to say, what are some of those things? What could you learn from that position? It may not be super glamorous, but at the same time, what will allow you to learn so that you can continue to move forward, get that clarity that you need, help you to clarify what it is the dream job, and continue to pursue it.
Well, great advice. Now tell us, what's next for you, Mitch?
Absolutely. Well, we're as you mentioned, the book that's the culmination of all of these interviews and some of the things that we've been learning is coming out soon, and that is the Dream Job Redefined. And so we're excited about that, and we continue, as you mentioned earlier, we have the Big Dream Gathering, and we continue to do those events all around the country, helping people get clear on their dreams and go after them and get the help they need to make them happen.
Well, congratulations on the new book. We'll be sure to include a link to the book in the show notes. And I know people can also learn more, Mitch, about you and your work by visiting mitchmatthews.com. And we'll include that URL in the show notes as well. Mitch, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, take care. And we're back in the Max List studio. What did folks think of my conversation with Mitch? Quick reactions?
He had such good energy. It was so fun.
I love the Midwest vibes.
Oh, yeah.
It's clear that he really cares about people finding what they want to find and finding their happiness, whatever form that's going to take.
And talking to people. He clearly loves hearing other people's success as well.
Right.
Which is awesome. It just comes through.
It really rung true to conversations I remember having in my own head, and then later on with my younger brother when he got out of college. Particularly that part about all of your friends are out doing what they said they wanted to do. They're all going to law school, or they got jobs in business, and like they all seem to have a purpose, and you're just kind of floating, wondering what's next.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and I didn't know this at the time. It took me the better part of a decade to figure it out. But I remember when my brother graduated from college, he had the same experience, and I was like, you don't need to know what you want to do. Like, just start trying things out. Like, take a job, and if you stay there for 6 months, oh well. Like, then you'll go do something else. And that was a message that he wasn't ready to hear right then. So he floated too for a little bit, and I think that's normal. I think a lot of people do that. Mm-hmm. But I if anything, I would just rename this show, instead of like your first job shouldn't be a dream job. It would probably be more like your first job probably isn't going to be a dream job, right? If it is, that's great. Like if you can swing that. But that, really to figure out what you want to do, and to frankly figure out all the options that are available to you, you need to like get your feet wet somewhere.
Yeah,
and start practicing and just doing things.
Yeah, no, that's really well said, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, it really hit pretty close to home, because I was definitely that person that didn't know. I know I've talked about this in the podcast before, but didn't know what I wanted to do or to major in, and all of that stuff. And that external, you look around at people who
comparing yourself to others,
right? Who do have that like very clear linear path, who want to be a lawyer, and so they know exactly which steps to take to get to that job. And then when you don't know what the end result is, it's really hard to, and you meet people and they want to help you figure it out, of like, what kind of jobs can I put you into? And you're like, I don't really know. But I did the same thing of just doing the learning approach, and definitely took a lot of the roles that Mitch was talking about, in terms of, sometimes you're not gonna make a lot of money, or it's not gonna be the glamorous titles and those types of things, but I really liked his analogy about the bridge, but it's the stepping stones to get yourself there. And I don't know, that's just the way that I learn too, is kind of learning as I go, and kind of everything can look good on paper. You want to be a whatever it is. And then you get into that role and you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was, and this is not what I want to do. But then you sort of take everything on, and you learn exactly what lights you up and what you're good at, and what different avenues come across based on what you jump into, which is a good way. And that's what helped me. And I came out the other side, which is good.
I think you did. And I think we're all going to change jobs 5, 10, maybe even 15 times in a career. So embrace it. The change is inevitable.
Absolutely. And learn while you're at it, and have some fun.
And I think that kind of underlies this whole idea of like, well, it's less stable and less secure to go for this bridge approach. I mean, I think the truth of the matter is there is no such thing as job security for anyone, right? If you have your dream job, you might lose your dream job next week, right? And so I think embracing this, I'm going to try different things. Worst case scenario, you develop a whole bunch of different skills, and you're not that single use avocado cutter that we talked about before.
Full circle.
Right?
Back to the avocados.
And I think that some people, even coming right out of college, they think that they know what their dream job is, and they get stuck in this role, or they go down this path because they're chasing this title that they think is what they want to do, and then it's hard to change your mind after, or hard to let yourself realize that it maybe isn't what you really want to do, because you've had your mindset on it for so long of like, this is my dream job, this is what I want to do, and this is what my identity is. And then, you realize 20 years down the road that it's not your dream job, and then you're lost. And I would rather just like do the wandering on the front end and get to the solid, more solid, like I've done all the things and I know because I've experienced it, rather than like just this, headstrong, headstrong, like this is it, and this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life, and then all of a sudden wake up one day and realize you're miserable.
You've just described half the people who went to law school.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people that did that, but anyway, everybody's different.
They are indeed. Well, great conversation. Thank you all, and thank you, Mitch, for joining us this week. And thank you, our listeners, for downloading today's episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In every issue, we give you the key points of that week's show. And we also include links to all the resources mentioned. And you get a transcript of the full episode, too. Subscribe to the newsletter now, and we'll send you our new guide, the Top Career Podcasts of 2017. Discover all the podcasts that can help you find a great job and get the career you want. Get your free newsletter and podcast guide today. Go to maxlist.org/topcareerpodcasts2017. And join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Jessica Sweet. She'll explain what to do if you hate your job. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.